I would like to welcome everybody to our 12-step reopening plan for schools. Really appreciate everybody coming back. I think, when did we meet last, Cecil and Mike? Was that a week or so ago?
Yeah.
Was that a week?
Yeah.
And let's see, Mike didn't sleep all weekend. And
neither did you.
Yeah. Mike put something together, and
it's been a long week.
It's really funny. Right after we met on Friday, right? Yeah, right after we met on Friday, the governor came out with an announcement, requiring masks for everybody in public spaces. And then there's other things that have been changing, and a lot has changed since last week. So I'm glad that everybody was able to come back. Mike, I appreciate all the work you did and putting this together. And I did put together some slides just to kind of keep us, and so everybody can look at things and follow along. I also want to tell you that we will be sending out the model plan, which you'll see pieces of today. We'll be sending that out to you this afternoon. When the video is processed, we'll send that out to you as well, and some links to some other materials as well. So thank you very much. This is a disclaimer. It's not legal advice. It's, we trust you to make the best decisions on behalf of your school, and we just want to be here as a support and a resource for you, and we just want to be a support for you. So, Mike, is this legal advice?
Well, it's coming from a lawyer, and it is advice, but it's not legal advice. So only a lawyer could say something that ridiculous, right? How about
Good
that?
for you. All right. I think most of you know Cecil. Cecil is a great resource for the schools, the Christian schools, preschools here in California. He's the Western Regional Director for ACSI, longtime school administrator and Christian educator. And your experience, Cecil, is, I know, invaluable. We're texting and emailing each other at night, now with, hey, this administrator is going through this. You're seeing a lot out there, aren't you, Cecil?
Absolutely. Administrators are going through a lot, and I think one of the ways we're engaging most in ministry sincerely, not meaning this in a joking way at all, but honestly praying for administrators, for schools, for school communities, and for Mike and Charlie, as we have been going through these webinars, and things are changing almost every day since we last got together. So we're doing that, and excited to come alongside today and be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate you. And Mike, appreciate you as well. He's kind of known as the Christian school attorney here in California, and sometimes a judge, which he did yesterday, and refrained from sending anybody to jail. So, right?
Not yesterday. Tempted. But so far everybody got off scot-free.
All right. Okay. I do want to say this is not political, everybody. This is not a political conversation that we're going to be having today. I want to share with you two different sources. One was from Fox News, and another one was from the New York Times. Both of them are saying the same thing. Both of them are saying, hey, we need to be reopening schools. We need to find a way to reopen schools, have our kids physically present. So, sometimes people are saying, well, gee, if you're on the left, you're going to be wanting to do one thing. If you're on the right, you're going to want to do doing something else. I'll tell you, this is one of the areas where both sides actually agree, I would say, that both are saying, let's get everybody physically present. And I will be sending out links to these resources this afternoon in our follow-up email. Also received something from NPR, and NPR did a really interesting study. Cecil, I don't think I sent this to you yet, or Mike. When they had the emergency workers, or folks that were the essential workers that needed childcare in New York and the areas that really clamped down, the YMCA had done, they did childcare for them. They adapted their plans, and they stayed open. Well, somebody did, it was from Brown University. They did a study of 916 centers, 20,000 kids that were in these childcare centers, and just over 1% of the staff and 0.16% of children were confirmed infected with the coronavirus. And so they were able to stay open, and they were able to serve these kids in person. And I'm going to send everybody a link to this study and this narrative. I thought it was really insightful because we're sitting here going, what are we going to do? Well, there's some people that have actually done it here in the United States, and they did it early on when they didn't know as much about the virus as we do now. So we're going to be talking about that today. So I thought that was good. This came out yesterday. As we wrapped this up, Mike and Cecil and I were going back and forth, and then I said, guess what, guys? Newsom is going to be planning an announcement today, right? Yeah, and I think it's going to be that there's going to be mandatory face masks in California, and we're going to see how that's going to impact schools. Now, let me ask you, Mike, if he comes out and says, hey, you've got to have it in all public places and schools, would schools, that would apply to Christian schools as well?
Hard to say, Charlie, and that's not just a legal answer. There is some question as to the scope of the governor's powers with regard to issuing emergency orders. If it applies to Christian schools by the framing of your question, then it would seem to me implied that it would apply to Christian schools for beyond 30 days. That inherently is outside of the governor's emergency order authority. His emergency order authority in dealing with the pandemic is supposed to only last for 30 days. I don't know that he's been directly challenged on that in court. He's been challenged on some of the scope of his orders. But again, that would be the province of the legislature, and they're simply not really doing anything right now in California. So, we'd have to just see how that plays out. I just think it's very unlikely that he's going to do that, but we'll have to see.
Sure. And right now, we've got schools. Cecil, when are most schools reopening? Late August, mid-August?
They range, Charlie, from early August to early September. Okay. They're all over the map. Yeah, as time has gone on the last few years, many schools have begun to open earlier than they used to. But so I would say middle August is probably average, but it would be early August to early September.
Okay. So just like we've had to be flexible in the past week on the planning, and even in the past, I was going to say 24 hours, but the past 12 hours, we are going to have schools be flexible as well. And the plan that Mike put together, I think is something that it allows some flexibility as you move on. Would you say that, Mike?
Yes, it does. By way of preview, the 12-point plan that we'll be looking at in this session today and then will be made available afterwards is a plan that provides for the minimal restrictions on school opening. And by that I mean masks are optional under this plan. The school is encouraged, based on scientific and medical data, to reopen to the fullest extent possible all programs possible. To do appropriate screening and cleaning and social distancing, again, where appropriate. So the way that this 12-point framework or outline or plan can be modified by schools would be to add more restrictive measures depending on the school's particular needs and the requirement of the community. So this starts off as a baseline to allow the schools to reopen fully as fully as possible, and then perhaps to add more restrictive measures as either additional orders come down or the school community requires.
Yep. Well, I think we'll see that. I appreciate that, Mike. I think that's what we want. So we did have something that came out from the American Academy of Pediatrics this weekend. I mentioned that there was a lot of news this week on this topic. And they're saying we need kids to be physically in school, and we don't see the public schools are going to be doing that. I know Cecil's had conversations with a number of administrators that the parents are coming to them, and there's some are saying masks, some are saying no masks. But what are you seeing about enrollment as as the plans for the fall roll out?
We're seeing schools that are experiencing significant growth. One administrator emailed yesterday, I think I shared this with you, Charlie and Mike, they've got a school of 180 that has 22 families that have signed up, but it's been kind of conditional. They're saying, we're going to sign up and we're planning on being there as long as my child does not have to have a mask on. One of the tensions that administrators are going to have to manage through all of this is because they'll also have families that are going to have the exact opposite opinion, and they're not going to want to have their children in school unless there are masks. I would say those from, this is just completely anecdotal from conversations with administrators around California, the folks that do not want masks are greater in number significantly than those who do, but it is one of the tensions that administrators are trying to manage. And the plan that Michael is going to explain is, it certainly allows for that, because masks can be optional in any plan that you have. Child whose parents want them to wear that, that's certainly an option to them, regardless of what the plan says, and it should be a part of it. Everybody should have the option if they prefer that.
Yep. So but I think the one thing that we were getting from a lot of parents right now is they want their kids in school. And I don't know that we're going to see that in the public schools. And I think that's where the Christian schools really have an advantage over where the public schools are right now.
Yeah, I think some of the plans that are starting to be announced now, we're hearing different alternative models, meaning they might be coming in with a group that's like the AM group coming in for 3 hours in the morning and then have a group in the afternoon for 3 hours. They might be doing some kind of a modified block schedule where they're coming in every other day. The plans are being announced, and as local districts are announcing those, these are some of the administrators we're hearing from that are saying, we're going to have to figure out how to social distance with increased enrollment, because the parents that are getting these announcements aren't happy about it. They want their kids in school safely, absolutely safely, but also absolutely full time. They want things to get back to normal in as safe a way as possible.
So what we saw from the American Academy of Pediatrics was we want kids in school, and then the guidelines that we've been seeing, one of the frustrations we're hearing from administrators and that Cecil, Mike, and I have, is that there's not really an actionable plan here in the United States. And so Mike found something from the University of Toronto. It's one of the top children's hospitals in their sick kids. It's the hospital for sick children. But it's one of the top children's hospitals in the world. And they talked about, they put together a 12-step framework. And Mike went through those 12 steps and adapted them for use in the United States.
Right. And primarily, obviously, with California in mind, although there's no reason why this would not be suitable for other jurisdictions. And again, by way of several disclaimers, the first is that we'll be watching every day California law as it develops at the state and local level to see how this plan will be modified, and it will be between now and the opening of school. There's just no question about that. And whatever the governor might have to say this afternoon, there might be something different next week. So, this is sort of for that California private Christian school, to get a handle and to get a start on things to think about to reopen the school. This is hopefully a very practical tool that you can use starting now to get ready for the opening of school. Second, it is also designed in purpose to be something that could be presented to a local health official who might come knocking at a school door to say, what are you doing to make sure that you're operating an environment as safe as possible for your kids and staff once school opens? So those are two of the purposes. There are others that we'll see, I'm sure, as we go through it.
Okay, perfect. All right, so Mike had kind of put together the components of it, the 5 different components for the preamble, mission, purpose, the introduction, the scientific, statistical, and psychological basis for reopening, the ongoing monitoring of the plan, and then I added something about the family's responsibility. And I've got a lot of words here, and I know when you're watching a webinar or you're listening to somebody and they've got a lot of words that are on the screen, it's really tough. This is what's going to be emailed out to everybody. I highlighted a couple of things in red that I think are most important that we would just want to touch on in each one of the areas. And Mike, I think I really liked your preamble that you put together talking about the importance of Christian education. Where did you take this from?
Yeah, well, it's taken from 2 sources. Actually, the preamble comes right from ACSI. So thank you, Cecil, and ACSI. And it's really the writings of Martin Luther. The Lutherans have been doing school for 503 years or so, maybe longer. They've got the program down pretty good. And Martin Luther, of course, is sort of one of the founding fathers of Christian education. And he sort of laid that cornerstone, if you will, of Christian education when he said that, we need to have and maintain Christian schools back in 1889. We are still fighting that battle now, 130 years later. And so that's kind of the foundation for everything that we all do, that we need to have and maintain Christian schools, and now more than ever, especially where the public schools are not meeting one of the most fundamental requirements of our society, which is educating our kids. There's an excellent Wall Street Journal article, the title of which tells you everything you need to know. The results are in on distance learning. It didn't work. That's the title of the study that the Wall Street Journal conducted after the 2 or 3 months or so of distance learning, where public schools had to shut down and pivot to some kind of distance learning. I would love to be able to amend that article for the Wall Street Journal, although I doubt they'd publish it, not even in the op-ed page. But to add to that, but it did work in Christian schools. Distance learning did work in Christian schools, and it worked amazingly well given the extraordinary circumstances and pressures that Christian schools were under. But we all would agree that wasn't the best way to do it. It was the way that was necessary at the time, not the best way. And we need Christian schools. And there is an even more fundamental purpose, I believe, for gathering, and that is taken directly from Hebrews 10:23 through 25, which says we cannot give up meeting together. And all the more as you see the day approaching, as the clouds continue to sort of darken, at least from a television perspective, into the future, it is even more important for us to continue to meet. And I know for our family, when our kids were young, and I am assuming almost for everybody else, that school really was as much a center of our life and purpose as church was. It really was. And so I think we cannot forsake that gathering. So everything we have done, every word in this program is written with the idea in mind to reopen our schools in August and September, again, as fully, as safely as possible. That's the goal.
And Cecil, are you seeing schools put together an alternative plan in case that the pandemic really does change to where, we reopen in August and then in October, things turn around, we've got to do home school again?
Charlie, they're absolutely having to plan on multiple levels. They need to prepare a plan for what is ideal for them, what that looks like for them in terms of their safety precautions, what they're doing to keep staff members, kids, and families safe, but to be fully open, as Michael's saying, to be fullest extent possible. But then they also have to be prepared to pivot back to a situation where their school is closed and they need to go to online, and you have to plan for somewhere in between. What happens when it happens, this week, and 2 weeks later it's something else, and then 2 weeks later we're coming back. You just have to be ready. The great news is ACSI research confirmed that 80% of our schools made the pivot to online in less than 5 days. And we have confirmed that parent perceptions of how ACSI member schools did, Christian schools did, they were extremely pleased with the results of what happened. Their expectations now will have arisen because they did such a great job in the spring pivoting. We're asking schools and encouraging them to be prepared to flip on 1 day's notice and to have a plan in place to do that so that they don't lose instructional days. Students are kept in whatever kind of routine is possible as quickly as possible. So that's what those are the kinds of plans that they're working on. I believe the document that Michael's going to share and has worked on will help them with that process.
And this next section here is just kind of an introduction, and it talks about the authoritative sources, because when you put this together and you modify this for your school, that you're able to take this, give it to the local authorities, give it to the local public health department, and communicate with the families and say, hey, this is what it is that we're doing.
Right.
So we have kind of an introduction, and you just tweak this and adjust it to how you want. It's going to be a Word document that ministries can adjust, but then what I want them to do is afterwards, I need you to send it to an attorney, have an attorney review it, make sure that they're comfortable with it as well. I recommend sending it to Mike Perazzo. Mike, he can review it for you if you retained his services as well. Is that right, Mike?
Yes, and then one of the other things we're going to be doing for everyone on this document that will be available to all, one of the first changes that is going to be made is that all of the citations, as you read through it, that are supported by medical evidence, will be providing the footnotes as appropriate. I think there are probably 27 or 28 footnotes. The reason I've not included them in this one is because they are mostly based on Canadian data. And Charlie, as you and I have been speaking over the last week or so, there is US-based and California-based data to add to that. And so where I can, I want to be able to substitute local data, California-based data, rather than just Canadian data for this document. So I'm going through the footnotes now, editing them, and then that will be part of this updated plan, so that when certain recommendations or guidance is given in this plan, you can point to a local authority and say, hey, these are the facts where this came from, okay? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, something that I just looked at that I shared with you both this morning is that in California, from the California Department of Public Health, from the California Department of Public Health in California, the number of deaths from COVID-19 reported as of June 30th, that's yesterday, the number of deaths in California as reported by the Department of Public Health Services is between ages 0 and 24, 0 deaths. Not one reported death in California up to age 24 thus far through June 30th. I think that's important. I also think it would be foolish to believe otherwise, but that someone at your school or someone very close to your school by way of family or perhaps off-campus service provider, someone's going to get COVID-19. They're going to become infected, and in all likelihood, they're going to bring it into the school. I think everybody needs to be prepared for that happening. It's too, the statistics, at some point in time, they don't lie with the idea that the number of infections are rising. But that said, people are going to get sick. Under age 24, around your school, they're not going to die. We haven't seen that yet. And we've been grappling with this infection for 6 months now. maybe longer. So those are the kinds of things that come from the state of California that we can use to justify the plan that I'm sure some of our member schools will be presenting to local officials when they come calling. And I've heard a couple of schools already anecdotally telling me just that community care licensing has come in. They have asked for their plan. Something very simple from one of our schools, a 2-page document, okay, was presented to a local community care licensing person, and they looked at it and said, okay, we just needed to make sure that you had something. They checked off the box and away they went. Okay.
But Mike, it's going to be different in Bakersfield than in the Bay Area.
Sure, it will be. Absolutely.
And that's what everybody needs to be prepared for, because in Bakersfield they're going to be like, that's fine. In the Bay Area they're going to say, no, you can't even open. And they'll prohibit them from opening. I could see that happening as well.
Yeah, and that can happen. What will likely happen, Charlie, is something in the middle. All right.
Right.
A local government official comes knocking on the door. A school ready for this presents its plan, and they will go down these 12 points and say, well, we like this, but we don't like that. We like this and we don't like that. And then it'll be hopefully a series of cooperative negotiations that will result in coming to an accommodation that will keep the school open, but maybe make some adjustments. So, for example, to one of the people I see coming up on the feed, on the chat feed, John Moran, I see you, okay? And how dare you call me out on this in this format? John is a good friend of mine, probably known to a lot of you. Hi, John. Can face shields take the place of masks? Yes, of course they can, okay? And a lot of schools are doing just that, okay, in order to give teachers a greater visibility. So thank you, John, for that question. And that's just one of the areas where you could make an on-the-fly modification to the plan that we have. And rather than saying masks are optional for all, you may very well say, if that makes the local officials happy, you'll say, you know what, we'll have our teachers wearing masks. And they'll probably say, okay, sounds good to us, something like that. So John, thank you for that question. And I also see from Laura, what if things, hi Laura Nelson, what if things shut down again? Would that be mandatory? I think we talked about that question a little earlier. We'll just have to wait and see what the governor's orders are. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. I'm not a prophet. My crystal ball, as I believe I said last time, is very very foggy. And as I used to say, when there's mist in the pulpit, there's fog in the pew. But I don't see the governor shutting down the state again, as happened last time. And so we'll see what happens. But there is an impact to the entire state of California, millions and upon millions of people when schools get shut down. And I don't think we can afford that. I don't think he can afford that politically again. I don't think we can afford that as a society again in California to shut down schools. Okay, and what I see happening now, as again, I know, Charlie, this is not political, but as the politics is unfolding, even with regard to what Governor Newsom might be doing this afternoon, is it appears he's taking now a more targeted approach. So, for example, we could see a face mask order today, right? Mm-hmm. I understand that. Some beaches will be shut down over July 4th weekend. I understand that. I may or may not agree with it, but rather than shutting down the whole state as he did on March 19th, what hopefully we will see is a more specific and targeted approach between now and the opening of school to, once again, try to flatten the proverbial curve.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through each of these areas. So this is what you were talking about the supporting documentation. And we're going to update this and send it out to everybody with footnotes saying, hey guys, these are your numbers. These are the state's numbers.
Correct.
For that's the basis for the decisions that we're making. Yeah. But let me tell you, those are going to change between this morning and this afternoon. And so what we've been doing is we've got a kind of an ongoing monitoring of the plan. This worked really well in the reopening of church programs, which was put together a team that's going to evaluate this. It's going to be the administrator, maybe a board member, a couple of parents, a couple of students as well, that can meet on a regular basis. It might be that you're meeting every week. Maybe you're meeting every month, every quarter. You know, it depends as things change. You're going to want to make changes, make recommendations, and then following the key principles of the American Academy of Pediatrics as they go through this. Everything should be flexible. We're going to inform people. And what's your thought on this, Cecil? Do we need another committee?
You know what, I just can tell you in our practice at ACSI, we have a couple of different groups that have met, one that continues to meet. One is looking at kind of operation and the protection of the facility, planning when they decided to close down our headquarters and our regional offices, as they're in the process now of getting ready at some point to reopen. That committee is working on those details. We also had another group that looked at events. ACSI sponsors hundreds of events during a school year around the country and internationally. So they had a group that was looking on those. I think we follow the biblical pattern when we bring people together with a number of counselors, a number of thoughts and perspectives to speak into those decisions, so it all doesn't fall on the shoulders and head of the head of school, who has already enough going on for them to worry about and deal with. So I would strongly encourage heads of school to, and it's free. Some of our heads of schools feel better about delegating lots of things than others. You can be on the committee if you choose to be, or you put great people in charge of it and let them make recommendations to the head of school. There's another model that can work, but we absolutely encourage you to have groups of people, just trusted leaders that you have. And Charlie, you made a great idea when you talked about the different groups. It might be school board, it might be, you could have parents on this, you could have staff members, faculty members on it. Just put it together with a good group that are trusted leaders, wise people that can speak into these decisions so it doesn't fall as one person's responsibility.
Yeah. And if you have a medical provider, a doctor or nurse in the community, in your school, ideal to have them on that. Okay.
Fantastic.
And then, yeah. And we also added something about the family's responsibility in this policy, about how it's ultimately the family's responsibility to know that sending their kid to school is the appropriate place for their kid to go. You know, people ask a lot of time about a release of liability form or assumption of liability, a waiver. And, you know, I don't know that they're worth the paper that they're written on sometimes. You know, it's helpful, but I think that, I think just you, the school, explaining to the families, hey, guys, this is what it is that we're doing. If you enroll your kid here, you accept that responsibility. I think is really one of the main things that's going to protect you.
Right, and what we're talking about here are two of the four steps, if you will, of the strategy. Okay, for which we don't have a document, and as soon as I kind of explain the four steps, you'll understand why not. They will be individualized to each school, but in terms of strategy, each school will need to have a communication strategy. Second, a written plan. Third, releases. And fourth, certifications and screenings for people to come onto campus. So some of those are legal documents, but so far what we've touched on is the communication strategy. That also has as a foundation for that, you know, the establishment of a team within the school that will need to be, you know, kind of monitoring all things COVID related and reopening related. Of course, the second part of that is the written plan that we've talked about. That's the second leg of that four-part strategy. The release, Charlie, I agree with you. Pre-injury releases, and we touched on this last time, but just to reiterate, pre-injury releases are always problematic in the law. The courts will oftentimes look for ways to invalidate pre-injury releases. The more specific they are, the better. And so we're working on some, as I mentioned before, intergalactic thermonuclear, releases, so that parents, students, teachers, vendors, everybody coming on campus understands they are taking a risk of coming into a group setting with regard to COVID-19, and that they knowingly, voluntarily understand and accept that risk. Of course, that is one prong of the liability protection. Another prong of that liability protection is to make sure that you've got insurance that is adequate to cover any injury, just like you would for anything else.
What do you mean adequate? Isn't it exceptional, Mike, what we provide? I'm kidding.
Right, yeah. More than adequate or exceptional, but even in that, Charlie, who knows? It is difficult to know what adequate insurance is. That's where schools, and I hate to say this, because when people say it of lawyers, I always cringe, but that's where we have to rely on experts. We have to rely on insurance experts. We have to rely on medical expert data. Then we have to also rely on legal advice and protections for all of us in coming into that school environment. We're doing the best we can, to provide all three of those things. This is how we're doing it.
Yeah. So Mike, let's go through kind of the other 12 steps. I just want to touch on each one, because everybody's going to receive this and they're going to be able to adapt it to their ministry. And, the 12 steps, again, I've got a lot of words, and I know that just drives people crazy sometimes when they're reading these, but I just want to kind of quickly just kind of have Mike and Cecil just give the concepts of each one of these. And, as we talk about screening, Mike, this is one of the key points, right?
It is.
How can you screen?
Right.
How can you screen every kid?
Right. It's so important. When I said as part of the strategy, providing screening certification for everybody, not just each kid, all families, all staff, all vendors coming on to campus. What each school, I believe, has got to try to do, if school were reopening today, is to draw an analogy, to do what the NBA is trying to do. They're trying to create, as they start their season, a bubble in Orlando. Okay. Similarly, the schools are going to need to try and create, to the greatest extent possible, a bubble of protection on their campus. That means having all families certify on a pre-opening basis, and then on an ongoing basis, that as they're coming onto campus, they are symptom-free. Okay. It is, again, you'll see on this plan, that is not for schools to stand at the front of the school and do temperature checks, although certainly they can do that, or for schools to provide, COVID-19 testing for everybody who comes onto campus. Most can't do that, all right? But you're going to rely on families to screen their kids and themselves every day, for teachers to screen themselves every day coming onto campus, to make sure that nobody pierces that bubble, pierces that veil with COVID coming onto the campus. That's all this is designed to address, but it is a matter of first priority to prevent symptomatic individuals from entering the school. That's simple.
Okay, cool. Cecil, thoughts on that?
Yeah, just echoing what Mike said, I would say that there are plenty of tools that you have available to you to make that process of families certifying that they and their children are safe, for staff to do that on an ongoing basis, using technology, using apps, using digital thermometers, using Google Documents where things can be certified and updated. That is going to be an important accountability piece. The kind of the understanding of administrators at schools around the country. It's very common for people who really want to go and work that day, that have a sick child. They load their child up with the children's Tylenol in the morning at 7 o'clock, drop their child off at 8 o'clock, and then at 10 and 10:30 and 11, as that Tylenol is waking off and their child's fever is breaking out again, that they're having to call home. But then the parent figures, well, at least I got 3 hours of work in. This is the kind of culture and things that we have to be very clear with parents because of the serious nature of COVID-19 that cannot happen. And there'll be some consequences for families that use the system in that way because they could possibly cause infection of people. So you have to be very clear in your language.
So you talked about an app that they can use to screen. Is there an app that you know of?
The app that we're talking about is one that is when you use a digital thermometer. And by the way, I think Katie can get access to this and post it in the chat. But it's one of our schools in the San Gabriel Valley that this is their plan, and they've started using this over the summer. They take the child's temperature, the staff member's temperature in the morning, and what it does is it displays on the screen, it's linked to it on your phone screen and shows that you're green, meaning you do not have a temperature. It shows that you're yellow, that you might have slightly elevated, or it shows that it's red, that you're above a certain point and should not be going out. And so as the kids are lining up to go to school, rather than do the thermometer themselves, they're just holding up their screens because all the students these days have cell phones. They're holding up the screen to show that they do not have a temperature. And that data has then gone into, in this case, they're using a simple Google spreadsheet, a Google document spreadsheet that records all these data points on 6 or 7 different items that parents have to certify on every day. So it tracks all of that. We're using an app. Temperatures are being taken daily and reported daily. And it's one good systematic way of not only getting the data, but then keeping it.
Okay. And if Katie sends that to me, I know she's listening, that I'll make sure that we send that out to everybody this afternoon. Okay.
I think two other quick points. I'm sorry, just back to that screening because it's so important. A great question on alerting the community if somebody does test positive. Absolutely to alert the community if somebody tests positive. The question then is always, do we identify the person that has tested positive? I think you at least need to identify the grade level, perhaps the classroom, wherever that person may have come into contact with other people on campus. And then the question of actually identifying someone by name, that's a difficult legal issue. I'm not quite sure where that's going to go right now. And again, to draw on that NBA analogy, they're not sure what to do either. There's some NBA players who are reporting positive. They're stating which team the player is from, but they're not announcing the player's name. So that's one that's going to have to be developed. And yes, I think part of that communications plan where the school should probably have, and I appreciate that suggestion, we can put something in here on the screening element of it, that the school will notify if there's been a positive test that's been reported to the school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's, again, it's the parent's responsibility in this situation to make sure they're not sending the kid there.
Yeah.
The school is not a hospital. You're not a clinic. The parents need to know that. So, okay.
Yeah. And then someone else, again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to do this brief. Somebody else asked, well, how many symptoms do you have to have? My response to that would be, in a close call, tell someone to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say whether you should have runny nose plus a fever plus a cough or just a cough and a fever. If it's a close call, have someone stay home. It's a strict exclusionary policy if you think you might be infected.
Okay. And then here we go on to hand hygiene. This is one of the things that the California Department of Education has required, that you must have hand sanitizers available throughout the school. And, you know, we should have been doing this all along, having everybody wash their hands, having everybody wipe their nose. But this is one of the things, and let me just remind you, we're going back to the University of Toronto, the Hospitals for Sick Kids in Canada, that has put out these guidelines. And this is number 2 along their actionable and authoritative steps. And they say, hey, everybody, wash your hands. Okay. We can have hand washing classes, whatever it is that we want to do. This is the controversial one. This is about masks. And again, Mike, this is the one that most people are asking about. Cecil, I know you're hearing that as well. And so the basis of this one right now is saying, hey guys, there's not a mask. Here's the data for that information. Masks aren't required. Here's our policy. Here's our basis for making this policy. And it might be changed at times. And I think that's really the way we want to approach that. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that's right. The policy is formed on the best available data from these pediatric experts and childhood disease experts that the masks in this instance, especially at younger ages, may do more harm than good. Okay, that's not to say that they aren't helpful. And again, for me personally, I don't have a problem with wearing one where necessary and even where appropriate. But this kind of comes as a basis formed that masks are not required in schools on a mass scale.
See, so when you're talking to the administrators and the parents are coming to the administrators and saying, hey, I'm not going to send my kid here unless they are never wearing a mask. What do you tell the parents in those situations?
Well, I would be interacting more with administrators, but my encouragement to them, the reason I like this document that Michael's prepared and shared with us is the way it is set up. You can obviously customize it for your school, but it's set up to communicate to families that there may be times when your child needs to wear a mask. And for example, there could be times or a school day where children are in a classroom, they're appropriately socially distanced, that you're not concerned with that, and they would not necessarily need to have a mask on. Then at other times, when they're leaving a classroom, when they're going out into a crowded hallway, when they're standing in line for certain things, where that being able to keep an appropriate physical distance is not possible or practical for them to do. And that would be a time when school administrators should consider that, hey, maybe that's when they put the mask on for that passing period or for this short period of time. But then generally, we're going to be in a position at school to keep students' physical distance appropriately so that they don't have to wear it all day, every day. That's the kind of discussion that school administrators are having. All of that, of course, is subject to orders that may come down that would be more strict or less strict than that.
Sure. And in the event that you do have an outbreak, you do have a kid that has contracted it or something like that, or you're aware, that might be the time when you say, hey, for this particular class, guys, we want you to wear a mask more often. So that's when, that's why I asked the question about when you're talking with the administrators and they're talking with the parents, and the parents are saying, no way, my kid is never going to wear a mask when they come onto the campus. You got to tell them, hey guys, we've got to be a little bit reasonable here. But the basis of our plan is, unless they've got to be wearing a mask, we're not going to be requiring it.
I think honest communication with parents is important in this, and it is going to be difficult for an administrator to tell a parent that their child is never going to be in a position during the 2020-2021 school year that they'll never have to wear a mask at school. That's probably not a realistic position to take, and some would say not appropriate. We'll leave administrators up to make those calls.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, physical distancing. Mike, I really appreciate what you put together here when adapting the Canadian plans, where it says, when students are in the classroom, to the extent possible, insert school name here, we'll arrange the classroom furniture to leave as much space as possible between students. I think we're taking reasonable efforts.
Yeah, that's all you can do. I'm trying to get, again, 4-year-olds to practice 6-foot social distancing. It's just not going to happen. But where reasonable to do so. And as I say, I think in the a little bit lower, the large gatherings should probably not go forward right at the beginning, and at least see how this goes. That seems to be fairly consensus concern that large gatherings can accelerate community spread.
So Mike, I think Charlie might have, you got,
Now I got you back. Yeah.
there you go.
Okay, was there a question? I'm sorry I lost you on the audio feed for just a second.
All right, now you can hear me, right, guys?
Yes.
You got it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Okay, you covered all that on physical distancing. I'm glad I dropped out during that point because, man, there are a lot of questions about it. So I'm glad you guys got
Sure.
to handle that one. Okay, cool. We can go on to the next one, if you'd like. Cohorting, you know, spell check keeps catching this one, and I think cohorting is more of a Canadian term because
Yeah.
I get the red squiggly line as we were going through this. They also used, when they spelled behavior, they used a U. I
Yeah.
noticed that a lot, and
that is
yeah,
correct.
I know.
Yep.
They're just being fancy. So, Mike, Cecil, cohorting, explain it to me.
Sure. Well, the concept of cohorting is for small groups within the school, say, for example, a third grade class, to stay together as much as possible. Okay. So it's another way of social distancing to the extent possible to keep third grade classes from mixing with sixth grade classes, to even beyond the school campus, to come to school with people who are known to you, and to do that, say, carpooling back and forth with people in your circle, as a lot of people have already been doing. That just brings that concept onto the school campus. That's it.
In practical things that happen in an elementary classroom, they're typically self-contained. So you have one teacher, one
Correct.
group of students. That's the perfect cohort there. But one of the things that administrators are working through is, okay, well, in our elementary program, once a week they go to the library with the whole grade level. So it's two different classes getting together at the same grade level, going up for library time or not so much computer lab nowadays, but some kind of media related time and other activities. Those are the kinds of things at the elementary level that they're trying to minimize to keep the students as much in a cohort group as possible to reduce any kind of potential for spread. At the middle school and high school level, this gets more difficult because the students are used to going from class to class each period of the school day. There are administrators that are working on plans now to have students stay together to as practical a degree as possible. It's not completely possible, but trying to even allow some students, they're going to stay in the same classroom all day, and it's going to be teachers that will be moving around. Whereas now, in a typical model now, it's the teachers stay put with their classroom resources and the students move around. That at the secondary level is more problematic because you have different levels of math, different levels of honors classes and things like that. And the kids, just by the nature of their school schedule, do get mixed cohorts that way. But be creative to the degree that you can do it. We're encouraging you to keep kids in as close to a single cohort as practically possible.
Okay, cool. What about when it comes to sports? Any thoughts on that? Because, you know, when you've got sports activities, are they going to be resuming in the fall? And when resuming, how do you prevent cohorting?
Yeah, for a lot of sports that are resuming even right now, again, for example, in football, everybody that I know that is having some spring or early summer football drills getting together, they're all non-contact for now. Okay, so you know, that's what they are able to do, and again, there are ways to work on things where you can, in sports, practice some social distancing. Basketball is one of the more difficult sports issues. Obviously, a little bit easier for baseball, a little easier, you know, for soccer. Okay, basketball a lot tougher.
I will say we're
as we get to clean.
I was going to say a lot of the football programs, and this is an important one because they typically are very large teams, normally among the largest teams at a school athletic program. Is many of them for this summer have decided to stick with, they're doing practices by position or by groups to keep them in smaller groups so they don't have an entire team of 40 or 50 students out there together. they're working together on their position things in smaller groups, to keep them separated.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Let's talk about cleaning. I know, we talked about, hey, we need to do one big deep clean. That's what we're telling all the parents that we're going to do. And then we're going to have regular cleaning schedule, and it's going to be reasonable, and we're going to give it our best shot. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, cool. Let's see. Ventilation. Right now I've got the window open. It's a beautiful day. We're talking about having windows open whenever we can, increase ventilation, and that we're going to be committed to making every effort that we can to bring in fresh air. And before we reopen schools, we're going to have our AC people come in and double check everything. Is that right?
Yes.
Exactly.
And again, these are following the 12 steps in the Canadian plan. Okay. Hey, this question came in. Is there a recommended temperature of the classrooms? I haven't even thought about that.
Me neither. Good question. I'll find out.
I'm not aware of one. I will say that
I like it a little bit cooler. I'm saying keep it cooler, keep the kids awake, right?
That would be a strategy many a teacher employs. I will tell you that we do have a small number of schools that are having AC systems upgraded this summer because there are some new aspects of that where that air can be treated with a special kind of UV light that reduces the opportunity for infection in those rooms as far as the air that's being pumped into the rooms through the HVAC system. So those are things out there. I've been told they can be $30,000 per AC unit to install, so that is not a low ticket item, but they are things that some schools are doing.
Okay. All right. This is just a plan when you've got kids that are higher risk for severe disease. And the key point on here is that we want the parents to work with the child's healthcare provider so that a decision that the parents can make and that the parents can inform the administration on how those kids need to be served best. Do you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, it's a very specific area. And on this one, I'm certain parents will be coming to the school. If their kids, present with a higher risk.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie, this is a good time to also say we're encouraging schools to have some kind of a system in place for students like this that cannot join in with the general population so that they don't force the child out of the school because they have some kind of an underlying health condition that doesn't permit them. They have to be extra cautious. Their parents have to be cautious to somehow create a system for extended work to be able to be done. They don't necessarily have to set up an entire distance learning program for a child or a small number of children, but we do believe that's a best practice would be to accommodate those needs as they arise.
Okay. All right. We have behavioral complexities. This is another one that was part of the 12-step plan about, the school is going to make reasonable accommodations for kids that have behavioral complexities. Right.
Right. And this is something that most schools are doing already. Just again from a socialization standpoint, not even necessarily COVID related. So it's just something that a local health official would like to probably see, that this is an area we've thought of. We'll be working with those families whose kids are maybe behaviorally challenged to make sure that doesn't become a touch point for community spread.
Okay, cool. This was interesting about mental health issues as well, and just talking about that support for just the support of these kids, because you've got kids that are transitioning. The kids have been home for a while, they've been isolated, and this is just talking about that we're going to be flexible with enrollment. We're going to be flexible with the way that we're going to help these kids, and we're going to have increased support, especially in the fall as they're coming back.
Correct.
Okay. Then the risk mitigation for the staff and other folks, we've talked about risk mitigation for teachers and other staff will be similar to those recommended for other public settings. So this is what you're going to need to be following the state guidelines, and the state guidelines will be updating you as much as we can. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And then the last one is talking about we're going to have a detailed communication strategy, and then we're going to be updating it on a regular basis. We'll be sending it out to the parents throughout the school year, and we're going to be regularly monitoring this the best that we can. And now, Mike and Cecil, do the two of you feel like these 12 steps are going to be something that they can do now in the month of July, and it's going to last them for a while? How often is it going to have to be monitored?
Yeah, Charlie, I think what I envision is that these steps, this plan is something that you can look at now, begin to think through how your school will adapt to this framework, and then be ready to continue to monitor. I think one of the things that we can also do both through Church West as well as through ACSI is provide, widespread communication updates when we think they're appropriate to add to and edit the steps. So I suspect this is a foundation. This is a first stab at creating a plan to reopen your school, and it's going to be added to and modified over the next couple months
or a couple of years. We don't know how long this is going to be around. And,
yeah,
and that's the reason I ask that is I think a lot of people are saying they want all of the answers right now, and they want specific answers, and parents want specifics. And I don't think it's practical. The 12 points are really the overview of the guidelines that you're going to be following and adjusting throughout the year.
Right. Although I will tell you just another little bit of good news, as I advised both of you this morning, Pfizer and a German biopharmaceutical company announced this morning very positive test results on a vaccine. It appears as though they are the two now that are in the lead for the development of a vaccine. They anticipate that they will get approval by the end of this year, could have as many as 100 million vaccines by the end of 2020, and 1 billion vaccines available if all of the human trials continue to go on the current arc by the end of 2021. Part of what is being lost in all of this, and something that I like to try to check in with every day, is the development of both therapies as well as vaccines. We got some encouraging news just this morning out of Pfizer, who if they can come up with a vaccine and it gets expedited FDA approval, they can scale it to 1 billion doses in their public statements this morning by the end of 2021. Now I know that sounds like a long time off, but that's always been the case. But that's the kind of news that I like to emphasize. COVID-19 is going to be here for a while. It's not going to be here forever.
Yeah. No. So Mike's giving us legal advice, medical advice, and financial advice. So you're saying invest in the stock of.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, no, yeah, I got to be careful about Pfizer, but I would add that that the Pfizer announcement drove the markets up this morning. Okay. And its stock as well. And there are over 100 companies, Charlie, that are working right now on a vaccine. It's a race, okay? And they're going to come up with one. It's going to happen. All right. We'd rather it be sooner rather than later. We can't rely on it right now in terms of what we're doing. And so I think the risk mitigation measures are still reasonable, and they are appropriate as we've outlined here today. But the fact of the matter is that I have a high degree of confidence in in pharmaceutical medicine that that will develop not only effective therapies, but also eventually a vaccine.
Yeah. Okay. And then I think that we had kind of a summary that we wanted to provide to people. Again, you want to match this to the culture of your ministry, of what it is that you're doing in your school, your preschool, your Christian college, and help communicate that to folks and make this available both to public health and then I think internally as well within your school. Okay. I really appreciate you. Let me put it back here. I appreciate Mike for all the time that he spent putting this together. Cecil, all of the feedback, all of the input that you provided. And I think that we put together a really good model for everybody to start with. Again, I want to tell you that once you've adapted it for your school, bring it to Mike. And for those ministries that have Mike on retainer, Mike can review it and help them kind of on an ongoing basis. And then also Cecil has tremendous resources for the ACSI schools. And I'd encourage the schools out there that aren't familiar with ACSI to reach out to Cecil, talk to him a little bit more about kind of how he's going to be developing resources for schools in the months and years to come. Mm-hmm. So any last words for you guys, Mike, Cecil?
Charlie, thanks for taking the lead on putting the webinars together and for connecting Mike into this. It's been a joy to be with you. And who knows, down the road, we need to do more of this, but we really appreciate you taking the lead, Charlie.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys very much. I'm going to call this as a wrap. We will be sending it out to everybody. Mike, you and I have a little bit of work to do to kind of finish this up today. And then we'll be sending it out to everybody after we've heard from the governor and have his feedback. Thank you all very much for taking the time. We appreciate you. We're praying for you. And if you need something, just reach out and we'll connect then. All right. Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.